Morning, members. I'd like to bring the Environment, Natural Resources Policy and Finance Committee to order. Representative Hornstein, we've got the minutes of March 11th.
I'll move the minutes.
Thank you. Discussion of the minutes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The minutes are adopted. Members, we have one bill before us, House File 1394 is Representative Fabian's bill. It deals with the Citizens Board and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. We've got a relatively long list of testifiers. It'll be real important to hear from all of them. So I think there's a good chance we'll be back later tonight. We have a room reserved. We'll see how it moves ahead. I know many of you, it's been a very long week. So we'll just have to see how it goes on whether we're back this evening or not. Representative Fabian, do you, let's see, we're moving this bill for possible inclusion. No, I'm sorry, that's right, you've got some government operations stuff. We've got to move House File 1394, it's going to GovOps. Representative Fabian, why don't you make that motion, then I believe there's at least one amendment, there's a technical amendment you have, and then there might be one more amendment you're supporting to get the bill in the shape you'd like. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would so move House File 1394 to
Be passed and moved
pass
on to
and move
GovOps.
GovOps. Okay. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the A1 amendment.
Members, the A1, as I understand, is a technical amendment. Any discussions to the A1? Seeing none, all those in favor of the A1 say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The A1's adopted. I think the other amendment is actually not yours, Representative Fabian, but it's Representative Dill's, and you support it. Representative Dill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move the A15-0159 amendment.
And Representative Dill, could you explain the amendment?
I will. If you look at it's all relative to the first page of House File 1394, and on page 1, line 13, you would strike knowledgeable and insert who demonstrates expertise. And if you're reading the amendment, it's pretty obvious that the intent of the amendment is to get additional expertise on this board, particularly on line 14, where you strike a field, put in fields, and then after agriculture, insert timber and mining. And so the point of this, at least the first part of the amendment, is to get some varying expertise on the committee, or to assure some varying expertise on the committee. Then on line 1.5, it continues on that no more than half of the citizens on the membership of the board may be within the metropolitan areas defined by 473-121. And at least for the members of the committee, I think everyone understands what the amendment does, and stand for question.
Discussion. Representative Hansen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I've made this point before on boards, and here we go again, where we're actually writing in more interests into this. I think a better approach would be breaking this out, excuse me, by congressional districts, so there's equal population on a board. The second part, 1.5 to 1.7, raises the issue of where people live as being as important, if not more important, than their background, their knowledge of their skills and their abilities. And I think we've got to, as Minnesotans, move away from that. We need to be looking at representing Minnesota rather than representing an interest or representing a region. And I know that's hard, and I know that people disagree with that, but here we go again with division and dealing with the interest. I realize this is supported by the author and member on our side of the aisle, but I want to make that point.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I do support the representative's amendment and would encourage people to support it. Members.
Any other comment to the Dill amendment? Representative Clark.
Just one question, and I just looked at it really quickly, but is there any reason, Representative Dill, that we couldn't have both knowledgeable and the other description you're having? Is there, I mean, couldn't they say both? Couldn't we keep both in them?
Representative Dill.
Or maybe that's what excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
You go ahead, Representative Clark.
Is
Sorry.
that what who demonstrates expertise is supposed to fill in for, or? I'm not sure.
Representative Dill?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go ahead and take a vote on the amendment as it states.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
No.
The amendment's adopted. Representative Fabian, if you want to now explain the bill the way it is as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also while I'm doing that, I would like to ask, I've invited a couple of people to be, I'll say, technical references for me with regards to the bill. Peter Larson and Tony Quillis have got some extra knowledge in this, but I'll get started with the bill while they're making their way down here. Members, first of all, what I'd like to do is, you know, I want to be clear in this. We've had some discussions. I want to be very, very clear that I want clean air and clean water and clean land, and it's very important to all of Minnesota. Environmental permitting and review and reform and increasing efficiency at the MPCA is nothing new for me. If you remember back to 2011, I was the chief author of House File 1, and we did a lot of stuff there. During that debate on House File 1, we were told that you know, we were going to lower standards and that we were going to have dirty water and dirty land, and we weren't going to be able to meet the deadlines that were in there, but obviously we did. And now I think that it's a piece of legislation that's kind of a model for reforming. That piece of legislation also well, I'll just move on here. And talk of modifying the Citizens Board really is nothing new around the Capitol. In 2012, the MPCA did a report on some suggestions for that. What I've heard from citizens is they like having a direct contact with the MPCA and the MPCA board. And in my opinion, this bill continues to place an emphasis upon that. And, you know, the bill is bipartisan. Senator Skoye is carrying the companion bill over in the Senate. You know, I've been working internally on an alternative, you know, possible changes to the restructuring of the MPCA board and how it goes about doing its business long before this bill was done. And again, I want to be clear, this bill does not disband the Citizens Board. It keeps the 9-member board in place, which includes the commissioner, and allows for public hearings on environmental review and permitting issues. The commissioner would also have the authority to seek advice of the Citizens Board under this bill. That's not changing. It's a new path, okay, I admit that, it's a new path for citizen involvement, and it occurs earlier in the process on an EAW or a permit application or an EIS possibly. And the threshold to trigger a hearing before the Citizens Board is really quite small. 25 signatures, 25 concerned Minnesotans can ask for the board to meet and consider their issues. Citizens can then have the board hear their concerns, and in turn those comments can be used to further inform the permitting and environmental review process while it's underway, and the concerns can be addressed promptly. I believe that this would be more efficient than waiting until the EAW or the EIS or draft permit is, or a permit is essentially done, which is what's being done now. The permit gets completed, the EAW is there, and now we go before the Citizens Board. I think that if we brought those concerns to the Citizens Board before those documents were available, you could take a look at the draft permit, excuse me, not the draft permit, but the permit application, or the draft EAW, or the draft EIS, and then take those concerns to the Citizens Board. This has the potential, I believe, to shave anywhere from 30 to 60 days off of the timeline for some of these complex projects. The Citizens Board, from my perspective, should continue to be involved in the rulemaking, which this bill guarantees. And the law is also quite explicit in how the MPCA must notify citizens about these matters that could come before the board. But I believe that the final authority on environmental review and processes subsequent the issuance of permits should reside with the commissioner, as it does with all other executive branches. There's not another branch of government where a board has final say or final approval on the issuance of permits for EIS or EAWs. And again, I want to be very, very clear, okay? I want clean air, I want clean water, and I want clean land in the state of Minnesota. And any suggestion to the contrary, as my good friend Representative Purcell would say, is bull hockey. So, through the bill, Mr. Chair, in Section 1, we're making some changes there. We've taken the amendments in there. You can see the underlined portions there. Where we get to the real meat of the bill is in subdivision 6, where we're crossing those issues out. But then if you go to page 3.1, the new language there, make final decisions on adoption or amendments of agency rules. Again, we're restating that the PCA board has the requirement for approval of those things. Rulemaking is fairly complicated. It requires a statement of need and reasonableness and all those things, and none of those things will be taken away from the board. On line 3.1, you can see that they would provide advice to the commissioner upon request of the commissioner. The commissioner can ask, but it does not limit the commissioner's ability to use the board. If you take a look at the back of the bill, there's a couple of repealers, subdivision 7, 8, and 10 there. Those are being repealed, and making some changes to subdivision 9. If you go to page 4 of the bill, the petition for public hearing, this is one of the issues that has come up. And again, a person may request that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Citizens Board hold a public hearing by filing a petition that contains the signatures and mailing addresses of at least 25 individuals who reside or own property in the state, and then on the different the different matters that can be there, environmental assessment, environmental impact statements, and so forth, and you can read through those. Line 4.27, 4.28, again, it talks about timelines. 30 days, so the Pollution Control Agency Citizens Board shall hold a public hearing within 30 days of receiving a petition under this subdivision. So that's, I believe that's something that is good for the citizens of the state of Minnesota. And let me finish. I think that this will make the net result is I think it's going to be a more active process. I think that staff is going to be able to be involved in these things when concerns are brought to the board. Highly technical people, lots and lots of technical decisions to be made. When the issues are brought before the board, if there's a permit application that's been brought forward or requested, filled out, if there is a request for a public hearing before the board, MPCA staff can be there. They can be listening to the concerns of citizens. They can weigh those things, and they can take those concerns into the next steps with regards to drafting a permit, granting a permit, or denying a permit. And in the end, the commissioner makes the final decision. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for questions. And
Thank you, Representative Fabian. Questions? Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Fabian, I appreciate you going through the bill. That was very helpful. My question kind of goes to what's the need for the bill? What is the need? Where's the evidence that this type of change is needed? What do you see as the evidence that the board needs to change?
Representative Fabian, if you'd allow me the flexibility, what I want to remind members, there was an executive order by Governor Dayton. It's Executive Order 1132, and it states, the evaluation of environmental governance under Executive Order 1132 must include a review of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Citizens Board's role in reviewing permits, environmental assessment worksheets, and environmental impact statements. The evaluation should include, but not limited to, an examination of the benefits and drawbacks of the board versus the agency commissioner making final decision on all or various subsets of permits and environmental reviews, along with how these matters are referred to the board versus the commissioner. Any recommendation must be reported to the chairs and ranking minority members of the Senate and House of Representatives committees having jurisdiction over environmental and natural resources. So that was sent to I guess I was chairing the committee then, or Representative Wagenius, I'm not sure. This is dated August 17th, 2012, so I was chairing the committee then. We have a responsibility per the executive order from Governor Dayton to look at this. So to Representative Hansen, I just wanted, I wasn't sure, Representative Fabian, I was reviewing this again last night, and I wanted to make sure that members in the public knew who brought us here. Representative Hansen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I think that was helpful to get that out. My question is more so, what does that mean? From the evaluation, where's the evidence that this type of change is needed?
Well, thank you.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Hansen. To that point, I would say for me personally, in the conversations that I've had with people who've been involved in the permitting process and so forth, that the timelines and the delays that result, and as per the report that was done by MPCA staff with regard to some alternatives, it consistently stated through there a couple of different times that by making changes to the board, you would expedite permits by roughly on an average of about 45 days. Permitting is timely, it's costly, it's technical. What I would like to be able to do is move the Citizens Board process earlier into the process so that, from my perspective, I think it would speed up the process and it would make it more affordable. And I don't believe it's going to have any negative impact on the final decisions. I think it just expedites things and speeds things up. That's the reason for me doing this.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But Representative Fabian, some of the requirements for speeding up the permitting just went into effect, and I think we have another report coming this summer. So, I mean, we've, as you know, starting with in 2011, there have been a number of changes relating to permitting to streamline without losing environmental protections. So, you know, do you have data or any, again, I guess back evidence of why this is needed? Number of projects or permits that have been delayed, or where's the need?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, again, kind of referring back to the report that the PCA did, I have the draft of the report, I don't have the final copy, but I've got it underlined in here where it says having a decision go before the Citizens Board can add an average of 45 days to a project timeline. Okay, so that's the data that I have. And Representative Hansen, it's stated in here, here it is again on page 4, benefits remove an average of 45 days off of a project timeline. So that's what I'm basing my timeline information on. And I don't know if Mr. Quillis has something to add to that. I know he's been very involved in these things, or Mr. Larson.
Mr. Quillis, comment?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tony Quillis, and I'm the Director of Environmental Policy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you for the time this morning, and I will be brief because I know you've got some citizens here that have traveled a while. I'm here every day, and I'm willing to come back later today, Mr. Chairman, or this evening as needed for questions. But, Mr. Chairman, I have personally been involved around this debate on the PCA board, and I'll date myself. I used to have hair on my head when I came to work in this building in 1984. And so this debate on the Pollution Control Agency board has been around since then, if not previous to that. And there has been discussions on whether the board is needed, because it is the only board around that I know of that Commissioner Zelli at the Department of Transportation doesn't have to answer to a board. Commissioner Frederickson at the Department of Agriculture doesn't have to answer to a board. Director Erlinger over at the Department of Health doesn't have a board that he has to answer to. So when we look at government structure, that's kind of one of the issues that kind of stands out and has been part of debate of just government reform over the years as we've gone through it and looked at it. And in part of that, we've even been part of, and I think Mr. Larson's going to be able to give a really unique perspective on how this has happened from inside and outside, but whether or not the commissioner should be part of the board, whether or not the commissioner should have a vote, and whether or not he should just be there ex officio, whether the board over the years has had decisions whether or not they should be involved in personnel decisions or not. So this debate and how they should be involved, whether they should exist, and how they should be involved in the operation of the agency has been around for a long time. And options have ranged from whether getting rid of the board to strengthening the board, or some sort of hybrid, if you will, on how that works. So, Mr. Chairman, I look at it from the perspective of, as the governor said during his first term in 2000, whatever it was, he wants his state agencies, specifically his environmental regulatory agencies, to operate at the speed of commerce. And we want to try and help him, as Representative Fabian referenced, to go through, and we've done on a bipartisan basis, to gone through and work with the agencies to go through Department of Agriculture, Pollution Control Agency, Department of Natural Resources, to try and speed up the permitting process, if you will. We've set timelines and goals for those agencies that they have been part of. We've talked about the reports that Representative Hansen that just referenced. We did 2 of them a year. Now we're going to do 1 of them a year. I think we've did that now down to August to go through. And the agency has been doing a good job in trying to meet those goals that we have set forth for them. They've broken it into tiers now, tier 1, tier 2. But there are always outstanding issues that come up and when we go through this. So the one thing in my conversations with the commissioner of the Pollution Control Agency and staff on successful projects that go through and don't take a lot of time, cost a lot of money, and the one thing that really bothers the business community is that uncertainty. When you go through and you commit the time and the cost, then at the end of the process, there's going to be a decision. That uncertainty always worries the business community, if you will, Mr. Chairman. So to try and, the best ones that go through that address that time, cost, and uncertainty are ones that involve the public early on. The public engagement early in the process, the better. And to let them know where it's at and how it's going, we think is a very good process. Representatives Fabian bill, we think, does that, moving House File 1394, moving the board earlier into the process and letting them get involved, go out actually into the geographic area where the region, where the project or permit or environmental assessment worksheet is going to be affected. Let the public input go through. We think is a very good thing to go through and get the public early on involved in the process. And Mr. Chairman, we think that is a good part and a good change that which should move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Quillis. Next, I'd like to hear from Mr. Peter Larson. Mr. Larson, as a former commissioner of the MPCA, thank you for taking my invitation to testify today. I thought it would be important to hear from former commissioner. And before that, Mr. Larson, Representative Fabian.
Mr. Chair and members, I want to make it clear that Mr. Larson is here at my request. I've asked him to come. I think he has a vast wealth of knowledge in this area, having been in the position that he's in. So that would be,
Well,
I just want that to be clear. And I know you wanted to be here.
It's now on the record that we have both asked him to be here, so that's good to know. Mr. Larson, if you could identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Mr. Chair, Peter Larson, the Larkin Hoffman Law Firm. I'm not here for any of my clients. I'm here to just provide some input into an important discussion. So I actually appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just as a bit of background, we're going to be talking a little bit about some language that I actually wrote. I guess it means you've been around here for a while, that you were here probably at this very table talking about how this language should be adopted. And now I'm here to talk about deleting language, and I'll tell you a little bit about that.
Mr. Larson, can I clarify? Are you referencing the language in 1967 that created the MPCA Citizens Board?
I was not even 10 yet. I won't tell you exactly, but no.
So
But I was alive, which is different than some of the people in the
So the folks that are listening and didn't hear it because of the laughter, I was asking if the legislation you were referencing was the creation of the Citizen Board in 1967, and you said that clearly was not what you were going to talk about.
It was not. I was a young boy at Cleveland Elementary in Fergus Falls at that time.
Well, good for you. I never knew that's where you started. That's good to know now. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just as a bit of background, I was at the Pollution Control Agency in the 90s under Ernie Carlson. I was the assistant commissioner for a couple of years. I was deputy for a year and a half, and I was commissioner for 2.5 years. And so I staffed the PCA board for a couple of years as assistant commissioner and deputy, and then I was the chair for 2.5 years. And I've been practicing law ever since. I just have a little background for folks. Like I said, I'll get into it, but I worked on this back in the 90s when some of the changes that are in law were made. And it's interesting, I think, to note that in '67, the agency was created when there was lots of agency changes going on. It wasn't just the PCA board. I think it was the Levander Commission, for those of you who remember that name, that talked about how government should be structured. The PCA board was created, I think, about that time as part of that. There was a Water Pollution Control Board at the Department of Health that was the predecessor, and you'll see that if you have all of 116. I heard some comment around here that that was the predecessor to the Citizens Board, and I didn't know that, and I looked it up last night. And it's true that the PCA was the successor, but the Water Pollution Control Board was actually, had a couple citizens on it, but it was mostly agency heads. At the time, they were executive directors or something. And then there was a advisory board geographically appointed to that board. They were just really figuring out how to handle wastewater at the time. There was 7 wastewater treatment facilities discharging into Lake Minnetonka in 1970, just to give you a sense of what they were facing. Moving forward quickly, EPA was created afterwards. The Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, which created environmental review in Minnesota, was created afterwards. NEPA, the Federal Environmental Review Law, afterwards. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Superfund, RCRA. So the PCA board was created when there was really virtually no law. There was some law, but as we consider it now, none of the modern laws existed. And I want to note before I talk a little bit about the board that I've spent a lot of time and known a lot of people that served on the board, and I consider some of them really important public servants in the state of Minnesota. Dr. Dan Foley, I'll just pick out as one. He's served since the 80s. I think he might even predate Tony Quillis's time up here, and he's still on the board. He's a medical doctor. He's an emergency physician, and folks like them deserve a lot of credit. So I'm not here in any way to criticize the citizens that have served on this board. I looked back, and I think this got handed out to you. PCA website has the agendas for the last couple of years on it, and you can go back farther than that. I just went back 24 months, and I think you have this in your packet. I went back and looked at the agenda and looked at the items that they've had on the agenda since March 2013. I counted 35 agenda items. There were 8 environmental review decisions and permit agenda items. There were 6 projects in that 24-month period for which decisions were made on permitting or environmental review out of the 35. So that left 27 items on the board agenda that wouldn't be affected by this bill. And I think it was actually 5 or 6 months. I think it was 5 months. So in 2 years, 5 months, agendas would be affected by the bill. The agency's agenda would not be impacted other than those 5 months. They would still do rulemaking. They'd still be doing the informational items that they did. They did one SDS water quality permit, which is not a federal permit. It's a state permit because it doesn't involve a discharge. They did one NPDES permit, which is the federal permit because it involves the discharge. That was for a Perham resource recovery facility. They did 2 air permits, one for the University of Minnesota and one for an ethanol plant. They did 2 EIS adequacy decisions. Both decisions were that the EIS was adequate. They did 1 positive declaration on an EAW, which has been discussed a bit around here, and that was on a dairy. And then they did 1 negative declaration on an EAW, because I wanted to know what I was testifying about a little bit, what would have been impacted the last 2 years. So I went through and again, I think you have that. I won't go through it, but I just did that preparation.
Mr. Larson, we do have it.
Okay. So from my perspective, I've sat on both sides since I left the agency. I've been in private practice, and this is why I think this bill makes some sense for you to think about. The public comes into a PCA board meeting when it's at the very end of the process. The public comment periods have been completed, and responses to all the public comments have been prepared. Final permits are ready for issuance that day, in that meeting, and most of the time they are issued. EAWs have been worked on for months or even years with the PCA staff, public comment periods, responses to public comment periods. EISs have been completed over years. There's, I think, 3 times where there's a public comment period on an EIS. The attorneys for the agency have reviewed the record and shown that issuing the permit is justified according to the record and all the applicable laws. And the staff and the commissioner have completed their work to recommend to the board that the environmental review and permitting is done. So it's not a very high leverage point for the public to come in and try to influence the process. And a project proposer, maybe this is a little bit responsive to Representative Hansen. A project proposer comes in and having spent, if it's a big project, potentially years planning, paying consultants, meeting with the agency, going through public comment periods, seeing responses to comments. If it's an EIS, it's certainly taken years. And then they're sitting in the back of the room after all that, and the citizens board and the staff are talking among themselves and might change the permit and might make a decision right there. And it's a difficult thing to sit through. And I can say, Representative Hansen, another thing that happens is when people do due diligence of projects, they ask people to do a chart. What's it going to take to get this project done? And when I've been involved in that PCA board process is the toughest to describe. Normally they've never seen it before, and you can't tell them how long it's going to take. And I had one circumstance where someone said, well, it's very interesting that you know so much about this, and I was working with another lawyer, and you guys seem like you know how you could get this done, but I don't even have to do that in the other state I'm thinking about. So that's not every day, but I can tell you, just taking off my PCA hat, putting on my hat I wear now, that's a circumstance. So just to conclude, Representative or Mr. Chair, it seems to me that you should seriously consider moving the PCA process earlier. It's a much higher leverage point for citizens if they want to actually influence the process. Whether you should leave the rulemaking in place, I was thinking about this last night, and I thought if the commissioner now had rulemaking authority, and there was a bill introduced to take that away from him and give it to a citizens board, I'm not sure that wouldn't be controversial. So I think it makes sense not to touch it, but I'm not sure that there's a low controversy way to say there's a perfect way to do it between the commissioner and the board. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Larson? Seeing none, I'm sorry. Representative Hornstein. Actually, Representative Hornstein, is it for the testifier?
Well, yeah, I mean, actually for,
Representative Hornstein.
thank you, Mr. Chair. It's somewhat based on Mr. Larson's comments, but then also a comment that Mr. Quillis made. They're very much related. And, you know, Mr. Quillis was concerned about certainty for business. And, you know, I find that a little puzzling because if there's one thing that's certain, based on the record of the Citizens Board and the PCA, it's that they're going to get their permit. And I don't know if either the author or someone can tell me how many times the PCA has actually turned down a permit, the Citizens Board. I count maybe a couple. I mean, I think there was a feedlot at one time. There was that Dakota County project that I described before. But how many times in the history of the PCA has the Citizens Board turned down a permit for a major project? Would Mr. Larson or someone know the answer to that?
Representative Hornstein, the next testifier, I have one other representative that has a question at this time. The next one I was going to bring down was MPCA.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not sure they nodded no to your question, so I don't know if that meant they didn't know or if it had never done. So I'm a little confused in the nodding that was taking place in the audience. So I think
Okay.
we're going to need them to come down and
Okay.
clarify what
Okay,
the
well, that-
nod meant.
And that would be
Representative
helpful.
Hornstein.
So, Mr. Chair, so that would be helpful, I think, to know, because, you know, that's one thing that's been, looking at this from the other side, you know, having, you know, challenged some of these permits, you know, there's frustration that that there isn't more, you know, scrutiny of these. So, you know, you can look at the Citizens Board from both sides on that. But I would be really interested to know how many times the Citizens Board has actually turned down a permit.
Representative, Mr. Larson, looks like maybe
Well,
a thought.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hornstein, I can tell you that's extremely rare. But what I was going to mention, and this falls different ways with different people, but that's true with the PCA staff. You know, people come in and propose projects, they normally go forward. It's just a matter of whether they get changed along the way. So I'm not sure that either the PCA staff or the board very often says you can't have a permit. It's just a matter of what the permit's going to say when it's issued.
So
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. So that's where I think that, you know, I'm a little puzzled by this statement that there's this high degree of uncertainty that people are feeling about this permitting process. Because I think if there's one thing that is certain, you know, most people who want to permit get that. And of course, a permit is a permit to pollute at a certain level or not. But that's what it is. And so, you know, I'm just a little puzzled by that.
Representative Hornstein, I just, two things. You might be building a case for why we don't need them if they're going to get the permit. And I would say in some cases, these permits actually are saving us pollution. They may be an alternative way of doing something that's going to replace current practices that are causing more pollution. So where it may be a permit to allow some pollution, it may save more pollution than it creates. And I don't even like using that word, but
Well,
Representative Hornstein.
And well, to that point, I mean, one of the reasons I feel strongly about keeping the Citizens Board and keeping it the way it is that, you know, oftentimes this does provide more transparency in this process. And it is important to look at the specifics of the permit itself. But, you know, you have an open opportunity for citizens to, you know, participate in a full, transparent public hearing or two, depending on the project. And so, you know, I would never advocate for not having a Citizens Board for that reason. So.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you know, oftentimes in this discussion that we have, the business community is who's at the table, okay? And those are the things that we hear about. But the reality for me, where I live, I don't hear a lot from businesses. Where I hear it from is cities who have complex projects put together. So anytime you add, let's just say hypothetically, 45 days to the process, that's an additional expense. That's an additional time that's added to the length of a total project. If you're doing something that's complex and you're replacing your sewage lagoons in northwest Minnesota, our construction season is very short to begin with, just because of Mother Nature. So anything that we could do to speed the process up, to create that efficiency, I think is a benefit. And Representative Hornstein, I admire and respect your concern, you know, that you're expressing. But personally, I don't see anything in my bill that is jeopardizing the input of the public. In fact, I think it makes it even more, it makes the decision in the end cleaner. It takes out that stuff, that negotiating at the very end of the process that may be going on between the proposer, the staff, and the board.
Representative Hornstein.
Thanks. We could move on. There's
Okay,
other concerns.
thank you.
But
Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I just have a quick comment about the bill. Representative Fabian, thank you. Sincerely, thank you. I was reading this bill on page 4, 4.27, section C, where we start here. You have brought this bill to the public where you require that these meetings need to be held in the location where it's going to be effective, and that you're actually bringing it out there where we have to face the people that are going to be affected by this. I can't thank you enough for having this provision in this bill. Far too often, our government, our agencies and our boards and the components thereof. They meet down here in St. Paul. They meet during the week. They meet in the mornings when it's almost impossible to get down here because most of us work. Very few people have time to drive down here Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. from Greater Minnesota to sit and listen to decisions that are being made that are going to affect their homes, which are hundreds of miles away. And you have brought this out to these where we actually have to face the people that are going to be affected. I want to say thank you very much and good job on this section of the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to bring forward Michelle Beeman, Deputy Commissioner, MPCA. Welcome, Commissioner. If you could identify yourself for the record, and then give us your testimony. That is a low chair. You might want to switch it. I knew former Commissioner Larson wasn't very tall, but I thought he really, really looked short there. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Michelle Beeman, and I'm currently the Deputy Commissioner at the Pollution Control Agency. And I also might as well say up front, I also am a former member of the board. When I was not working for state government, I was appointed by Governor Pawlenty to serve on a term for 4 years, and I was confirmed by the Senate. And so I have a perspective of having been a board member and now being Deputy Commissioner, and I do staff the board during the board meetings. So I am part of the process now, even though I'm not a member of the board. As you recall, when the commissioner was here presenting before on the budget, the overview, he did do an overview of who the current board was, and at that time expressed his strong feeling for the value of the board as it is currently constituted as part of the decision-making of the agency on certain matters. So I'm here to express the agency's opposition to the bill because it does, at this point, fundamentally change the nature of the agency as it's structured by taking the board and making it an advisory body instead of a decision-making body. It's obviously up to the legislature how you want to structure your agencies and the authority of the agencies in the decision-making, but this has been the way the PCA has been constructed for 48 years from the beginning, and we believe, yes, there's ways that it could be modified, and yes, this has been debated on and off over the years, but fundamentally it works well for those matters that are highly controversial or complex, where there's public visibility and a need for dialogue with the decision makers of the agency. Just to set a little bit of context, again, to be clear, the vast majority of the permits and other environmental review decisions that the PCA makes are done outside the board. The commissioner makes decisions on permits, the staff make decisions on permits all the time. As some of the data that you've been presented show, there's a very, very, very small number of actual matters before the board. And some might say, well, then why have the board if it's that small a number? Those tend to be the projects where there's localized controversy in the community or concern from neighbors of the community about that particular proposal. It could be that it's highly visible or it's been a long-standing issue. And those are the situations where community members, the public, and the proposer want to be in front of the decision makers at the time they're making that final decision. It's also at the point in the process where, yes, the permit has been very well developed. The staff present that to the board with lots of technical information. They've been working with the project proposer for a while. Hopefully, the proposer has been working with the community. That is not always the case, though. I would say my personal experience on the board is that some of those matters came before the board because there had not been dialogue, and the community was very confused or concerned about what exactly this permit was going to allow or what the environmental worksheet was saying about the project. And it was only when there was able to be that forum, that dialogue and questions, and the board was able to ask questions to pull out more information, that we were able to forge a final solution, a final resolution through the vote on the permit or the EAW. It's that kind of back and forth discussion and probing from citizen members, not experts, on every possible range of technical topic of the PCA, but well-informed professional citizens who are there asking the questions and probing that really gets to a final resolution that hopefully then is satisfactory enough it will not be challenged. One of the questions and concerns I hear come up is the delay factor, and a couple points on that. Yes, coming to the board takes a little more time than if the commissioner were just to sign off on something. But whether it's the commissioner deciding or the board, that legally is a final agency decision that can be appealed. It's hard to know how many of these matters would have been appealed by one party or another to court and on and delaying that way if we weren't able to reach a resolution and modify the final outcome at the board meetings. So while there might be a short delay up front, I can't tell you because I don't know what wasn't challenged because we were able to resolve it. But I know that there were a number of matters that both when I was on the board and now sitting in the last few years where we made changes, the board made changes based on input in the meeting that then added something to a permit or changed something that then there was no further challenge. So I think those are things you have to balance when you're looking at that. Another thing, I'm not quite sure how this bill would avoid the same sort of 45 or 60-day delay when you still have provisions for public hearings. If the board, if it's advisory even, is being requested to have a public hearing out in the community, that's going to add more time right there before the commissioner can make that final decision. So that's still helpful in the sense that there would be public dialogue, but I'm not sure it's getting at any sort of quicker slicing off of time for permit and environmental review decisions. I'm not sure how much time you want to allow me, Mr. Chair, but I would just say that
You're doing fine. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Of the variety of topics, as Mr. Larson was noting, and I think as Mr. Poulos was noting, really there is not any particular sector, there's not even any particular geographic area that the board gets involved with. We've had permits and environmental review decisions in wastewater and mining and landfills and remediation and some feedlots. Until today, I thought that largely the prompting of this concern was one decision by the board related to the dairy. If this is also about sort of an EQB review of improvements to the board, I think there are other areas we could go into. But we went back over just for information's sake the last 8 years, and we found a pretty even distribution at about an average of 8 permits or so a year, and about 10 environmental review decisions a year. So again, it's not the vast majority of work that the chamber might be concerned about, and that project proposals are still taking place through the normal agency channels with staff and with the commissioner deciding. But again, things like the 3M PFC contamination problems, that was something that came before the board a couple times. I happened to be on the board at the time that we were dealing with that. It was very of much concern to the community about what those PFC contaminations were doing in the community. What was the PCA going to do about it? There was a day-long meeting that was all about the consent order for the 3M and the agency. Those are the kinds of things where transparency and citizen access to their government decision-making was I feel is very important. The agency feels is important. The commissioner feels is important to allow a viewing into how decisions are made about that. If there had just been backroom discussions and then, here's a consent order to 3M, I don't know how the community would have accepted that or would have understood some of the technical nuances. When I was a board member, one of the things I felt was important for me to do was to ask questions of the staff who were there in terms that the citizen community would understand better. Because yes, these are highly technical matters. Parts per billion of this and limits of this for an air permit. And it can be dense, it is dense. And I think it's challenging for citizens and community members sometimes to understand exactly what does that mean? What is the mercury here and what is the methylization here? Part of what I think good board members do is become that translating bridge. And in the context of the board meeting, ask the questions in terms and try to get simpler answers. As much as I love the staff, they can dive down into the weeds pretty quickly. Try to bring them up to a level that is understandable. And again, I think that helps bring confidence by the citizens in what PCA does, because we do work in a regulatory area that sometimes is very hard to understand, and especially when we are allowing pollution, so to speak, through these permits. People don't always understand, what do you mean you're letting this go out into the air or the water? So I think the board does a helpful job there as well. It's unique, I agree. No other agency has this. Other states, they do. Wisconsin has a board that oversees DNR and PCA type of regulatory work. But I think because of the nature of the things that we regulate, these are important issues that touch communities in a different way than other parts of different agencies do. maybe DNR should have a board, I don't know. But for us, we do think it helps with the confidence and the citizen and access and transparency to the board. So for those reasons, we don't think that this makes sense at this time to change the structure for the PCA that way.
Well, thank you, Assistant Deputy Commissioner, apologize. Commissioner, I've got to ask, I think it's very good that your testimony was on the tape and on TV. And I would encourage the agency to go back and watch your testimony, but I'm going to paraphrase. You just did the best possible testimony for support of Representative Fabian's bill that we could possibly have heard. It involves localized controversy concerns where you want to make a pitch with lots of technical information, citizens, not professionals, appeal a decision on just where some business, or this was my point. So what the net effect of what happens is the business just up and goes somewhere else, to a different state. Make changes based on the input from the board. It's a board of citizens, not professionals necessarily, not scientists. These are citizens that you're saying can react on emotion instead of fact. You talked about the complexity and mercury levels and whatever that meant. I don't know, you lost me, it was something else. Dive into the weeds about how the agency can dive into the weeds. And now we're going to go and let emotion dictate what happens instead of an agency with 900 employees, with some of the most talented people that can come with this. We heard, I think it was last week, actually the week gets long around here, it may have been earlier this week, from a number of environmental groups testifying how the importance of science and making sure that we don't follow emotion and that we follow science. Thank you for your testimony, and I would strongly encourage folks to listen to what you just said and put it in the context of this bill. I wanted to make one other point. You mentioned this handout of where all the decisions are, and you're right. There's a number of decisions across the state, and this isn't about one particular decision. It also notes, members, and it notes what were the industries that were involved in the decisions from 07 to 14, and then it also says the location by counties, and it's a darker blue are all the different impacted counties. It also lists the 8 board members. There's currently 1 unfilled position, and I'll note that 1 unfilled position is the one required to be a representative of organized labor. So, Deputy Commissioner, thank you for your testimony. I strongly encourage you to listen to it, because I got to be honest, you just gave the best reason for why we need to look at this, because it is about emotion and not about science and fact and reason. So thank you. Deputy Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, since you are interpreting my words in this
No,
way.
Commissioner, I encourage you to go back and watch the tape.
I will do that. But I just want to make one point. When I say that there are changes that can be made at the board meeting, I did not mean to suggest or imply that board members are writing the permit or writing the technical pieces of that. What I'm saying is that in the discussion that takes place when staff are there, issues come up, questions are raised, that then give direction back to the staff to think about how is this addressed in the permit, how might this be changed in the permit, and the technical staff are the ones that deal with that and deal with the science. There's not just insertion by citizens into the technical documents that are done. What is raised are the questions and the concerns from the citizens and the board members that the staff then take and work with the project proposer, often that same day, to come to a common ground in the final work product.
Thank you.
I just don't want that misunderstood.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, we've had a couple of references to the fact that this is the only board in state government, and, you know, I've counted at least 4, and there may be more. I mean, obviously Bowser is a board, that's in the name, but you have the MAC, you have the Met Council, you have the Public Utilities Commission. So this isn't necessary, you know, we're treating this as it's some sort of outlier, some sort of, you know, very unusual structure within state government, and it's not. And I would argue that in the case of all of those that I mentioned, as well as the PCA Citizens Board, it is absolutely critical. You know, they're not comprised of experts, but they all play a similar function, and that it's absolutely critical because this is a point of entry for the public in a very open and transparent way at a decision-making level. And so that's why, you know, keeping things the way they are is actually, you know, the best outcome, I think, for public involvement and public participation. And I wanted to just ask, because I still haven't got an answer as to how many permits the Citizens Board has denied, either in its history or in recent history.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, members, I am not aware of a full denial by the board, at least in the 8 to 9 years we've looked back. There may have been one where it was part of a rescind and reissue. There are changes to permits, but I'm not aware that the board has just flat out denied
Commissioner
it.
Beaman.
But I said I haven't exhaustively searched every decision in the last stretch of time.
Commissioner Beaman, I think Representative Hornstein might be asking, is there any reversals of a recommendation from staff that the Citizens Board made in the history of it or in your involvement?
Mr. Chair and members, in terms of a reversal, again, the dairy decision that was last August was the reversal. It was a vote against what the staff recommendation was. The staff recommendation was for a negative declaration, and the board voted to go forward with further information in the EIS. That is the only decision that we looked at, again, in the last 8 years or so that was, I would say, opposite of what the staff recommendation was in the final outcome.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you. So 1 in 8 years.
Yeah.
And then the other issue that I think Representative Fabian is trying to get at relates to environmental review. So are there instances where the board has decided to do an environmental awareness worksheet where one was not requested, or upgrading from an environmental worksheet to an EIS? How many times has the board, let's just take those separately. Do you know or can recall a time when no environmental review for a project was envisioned and then the board ordered an EAW?
Commissioner Beaman.
Mr. Chair, members, you know, off the top of my head, I can't think of an example, but again, I'd want to go back and look at the numbers. Because
Okay, and then Mr.
Representative
Chair,
Hornstein.
one last one. So then, are you aware of a time when a project had an EAW and then the board said, well, we don't think that's a high enough level of scrutiny, so we are ordering an EIS, a full EIS for a project? How often has that happened?
Commissioner Beaman.
Mr. Chair, members, again, I'd want to verify that, and we can certainly get back to you very quickly. I think there may have been one, but it may have been where the staff were also recommending an EIS for various reasons, and the board agreed with it. I believe the dairy decision was the only one where the board disagreed with staff. I'd have to verify if there was one where staff recommended an EIS, it probably was once or twice at most.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Representative Hornstein.
That's helpful, and you know, just beginning to think as I hear your testimony and read the bill that we're looking at this is a solution in search of a problem, because we don't have permits being denied on a regular basis. We don't have environmental review being ordered on a regular basis outside of, you know, the parameters of the staff recommendation. So, you know, again, I'm puzzled by the need for this, and again, this somehow this notion that it creates so much delay and uncertainty for both the public and private sector who are going before the PCA.
Thank you. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Beaman, and welcome. I want to go back to the executive order that the chair referenced and that the author has referenced. And was that, in talking about a 45-day delay, that was a result of or was a draft EQB study, or when were the results published from that? Or was it before we did the reforms last year that haven't quite fully taken effect yet?
Commissioner Beaman, if you don't have that on the tip of your tongue, you can get back to us. Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, members, yeah, only this morning was I made aware that there was some reviewing of these reports. The draft I have in front of me, I don't know the exact timing, was a September 2012 draft with some alternative analysis of EQB and PCA Citizens Board How that fed into changes that were made with the legislature in the next session, I don't know the timing of that. And it really was driven by the EQB's analysis, not PCA's own analysis of this, so that we'll have to check also with some EQB staff on that.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to look at context when we're citing the reports, because we're not in the fall of 2012 anymore. We're in the spring of 2015. I do want to respond back to kind of the perception of citizens running wild here at a meeting. I just was looking at the folks who are on the board, and we've got a PhD in water resources with an MS in soil science, an adjunct University of Minnesota professor in agronomy and plant genetics, so that's one. We have a physician with an expertise in toxicology. We have an immigrant background from Vietnam with a BA from Yale and an MA from the U of M in international relations. We have someone from the Duluth Transit Authority, international business, a farmer with soil and water conservation district expertise, and then a PhD, MSc in environmental engineering and water chemistry with a BS in soil science. Doesn't sound like citizens running wild to me. It sounds like folks with a science background who are there to represent Minnesotans and apply what they know and be doing it and do it in a transparent manner. And Ms. Beeman, just maybe could you give your background when you were a Governor Pawlenty appointee? What's your education and expertise?
Commissioner Beeman.
Sure, Mr. Chair, members. My background is that I have a law degree and a master's in environmental studies. I came to Minnesota to join the Attorney General's office initially back in the early 90s. I also had clerked for courts before that. And I was representing the DNR when I was within the Attorney General's office, and represented them on a wide range of natural resource litigation matters and others. I then moved into the Department of Natural Resources as their legislative director during the Ventura years. So I had the expertise of policy there. And then I had left state government when the change of administration happened then, and I was working for the Nature Conservancy as their conservation director for Canada programs at the time that Cheryl Corrigan was the commissioner of the PCA at that time, and they had a vacancy on the board, and she approached me because of my familiarity with the legal and policy issues, and because they didn't have an attorney on the board at that time, and they thought that would be helpful for a lot of the administrative process and procedures. And so the governor chose to appoint me. I did go through an interesting confirmation hearing in the Senate that year, and sat on the board for 4 years. Then when I took a job as the environment director at Dakota County, I actually just resigned from the board because I thought there might be too many potential conflicts in my role.
We're going to begin with the testifiers, and I think we've got most of the outstate ones. Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just a minor issue with the new language on page 4 to the author on lines 31 and 32. The commissioner shall publish the notice in a newspaper of general circulation. That tends to be the kind of language that we're changing in some bills because it doesn't provide, the newspaper business being what it is, it doesn't provide the kind of flexibility for public notice that is sometimes necessary. So I just thought the author might want to rethink some flexibility.
Comment well made. Comment, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'll make note of that, and we can have another offline discussion on, this isn't the final product here, I'm sure, but, yep, thank you for that, pointing it out.
Thank you, Representative Hausman. Seeing no other questions, let's begin. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Fabian, just to clarify, does your bill actually eliminate the Citizens Board?
Absolutely not.
Representative Fabian.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and Representative Torkelson, no, it does not.
Well, thank you.
Follow up, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've gotten the impression from some of the questioning that somehow that we are eliminating this very important board. Citizens' input is important to all of us, but the timing of this input and the impact of it is certainly also important. And I'd just like to remind everyone around the table that this bill does not eliminate the Citizens Board. It, in fact, keeps it in place with a very strong role in rulemaking. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let's begin with Kathy DeBoer from Chicile. Ms. DeBoer, if I messed your name up, could you read?
No, you did. You did.
Okay. If you could identify yourself for the record and who you represent. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Kathy DeBoer. I'm a farmer and a registered nurse, and I represent John, Kathy Les, and Mitchell DeBoer. We live a mile south of the latest decision by the MPCA board regarding the Baker Dairy. We live a mile from that dairy and are strongly opposed to it. I'd just like to give you a little bit of background on the situation with that dairy and the permit application process, because I think it's very important in determining how important the Citizens Board is. And I love the name Citizens Board because that's who represents me. Last spring, proper notice was given, comment periods were given, and the dairy was letting us know that they were proceeding to put 10,000 cows in a small area of about a quarter of land, 160 acres, just a mile north of us and a mile to the southeast of neighbors of ours whose 10-year-old daughter has asthma. We were very concerned about the impact. We already have one of their dairies 6 miles from us, and the impact is huge with trucks and safety and water usage. And so we decided we were going to try to oppose this dairy. The dairy was very good in having an informational meeting, which we had on July 22nd at our Chicago, Alberta school. And they came, brought a nice PowerPoint presentation, and were very convincing, except that the 200 people there, at least 90 to 95% were against the project. They did not take our feelings into consideration and kept on with their permitting process. I'm sure that they had gone, quite a ways with this process already, but our only other opportunity to have any input in this process after the comment period was to go to the Citizens Board. I went there, I testified. I'm not trying to put down the MPCA staff or Commissioner Stein in the least, but in my experience, what happened is the permit was, I'm just trying to be very nice here, it was just incomplete and inaccurate. And I can give you several examples of problems with this permit that day. The MPCA's hydrogen sulfide level in Minnesota is 30 parts per billion. And MPCA's own modeling numbers said that the hydrogen sulfide level going toward our little neighbor's home was at 29.24 parts per billion. That's very, very close to the Minnesota allowed level, and it was very concerning for us and for her. The aquifers that are being used by this dairy are going to be using 100 million gallons a year. And DNR's own figures say that the aquifers will be at their 50% threshold in between 15 and 35 years. Well, I plan to still be living there in 15 years, and I really would like to have water at my home. The test wells that they drilled at the site showed that there was inadequate or low quality water for their cattle. So they had plans to pipe water for 12 miles, but they had no permits or easements for this pipeline. And in fact, the well that they were going to use hadn't been monitored for years and years. And that was one of the other things that the Citizens Board members brought up and asked questions about that day. They didn't have the required number of acres procured for their manure disposal. And just some other things they said in their application, that they mitigate the dust problem with all the semi trucks going back and forth with the silage and haylage and manure by putting chloride on the roads to decrease the dust. But I can tell you, personal experience, they do not, and I had some days a 1/4 inch of dust in my mailbox, on my mail, and I pick my mail up every day. Okay, so the dust problem was huge, and they said they took care of it, and they didn't. Also, the fairs run several other dairies in our area, and they did have to admit that day in the August hearing on the record that there had been a spill, but there have been no reports of any spills by the Fair Dairy Company, Riverview Farms. So I'm just telling you that MPCA staff recommended to approve this permit. With all these inconsistencies and the inadequacy of the process, and Chairman Stein voted for this permit, even though the other 5 members of the board that day voted against it. They didn't vote against the permit, let me clarify that. They voted to require an EIS. This permit is not denied. An environmental impact statement needs to be done to decide if the hydrogen sulfide levels are going to be okay, if there's going to be enough water for the surrounding homes and farms, and if the runoff from spills and so forth needs to be reported. If there is a spill, it needs to be reported. Those are the things that were required by the EIS. I have a lot of other issues with how my quality of life has changed. I live 6 miles from a dairy, and my quality of life has changed for the worse. If I lived 1 mile from a dairy, I can't begin to imagine how much worse it will be. And for me and my neighbors and little Madison Anderson, who has asthma. I really urge you not to remove the power from the Citizens Board. In my case, they are watching out for me and representing me, a citizen. I'd love to take questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Ms. DeBoer, and thank you for your testimony. Seeing no questions. I'm sorry, Representative Clark.
I do have one question. When you were talking about the impact of the existing facility 6 miles away, I actually have rural relatives, farm relatives who lived into their 90s in the last, I don't know, dozen years of their living on their home residence. They couldn't open their own windows, and they were people who lived there all their life and raised all their kids there and so on. I'm just wondering if you have any issues with that kind of problem.
The odor?
The air quality and being able to enjoy your air quality.
Ms. DeBoer.
Chairman and members, I don't I'm 6 miles away, and I don't smell that dairy very often. Hydrogen sulfide is not an odor-related gas. You can have high hydrogen sulfide levels without having the ammonia odor. So I don't at this time, but I have the trucks running past my home. When my 2 boys were learning to drive, it was a nightmare to send them out in driving in our area because the drivers of all these trucks are, in my opinion, inadequately trained. Each year, we have 1 or 2 of their trucks that take corners too short. If you drive a long vehicle, you have to take it a large corner. And the last one, my neighbor was one of the first on the scene, and he asked the driver how many years he'd been driving, and he said, well, this is my 3rd day. So the safety issues are huge. I don't want to live a mile from a dairy. I'm very concerned. My youngest son graduates this year. I really wanted to have his graduation party at my home. As it stands, the dairy won't be in operation by then, and I'm clear on that matter. But I really think the Citizens Board was the only place that I could say and find out how this was going to affect me, because my local meeting, we got nowhere with the company.
Thank you, Ms. DeBoer. See no other questions. Thank you. Next to testify is James Canny from Franklin. And if you could come down and tell us who you represent, and apologize if I walked all over your name. If you could give me the correct pronunciation, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is James Conning, and I'm pleased to be here to a certain extent. It's a beautiful day out there, and a day like this, I'm happy I'm a dairy farmer and not a representative, sitting inside of a windowless room, hearing testimony as to what they should do. It's really an honor for me to be a dairy farmer and a small family dairy farmer. So what I'm here about is to give kind of the perspective from the country, the boots on the ground perspective of what we would like to see out in the country and how this would impact us. As a small dairy farmer, we do not, for the most part, worry about the permitting process. It's not something that's going to be a big problem for us. It's not something that's going to be a big hurdle for us to overcome. At this time, I'm very happy to say that I am not a last generation dairy farmer in the state. I'm a 6th generation Minnesota farmer. My family came here in 1854. But I'm not a last generation. My daughter and son-in-law are taking on the farm, and that's the reason I can be here, not home milking cows right now. And they're doing an excellent job of it. And they are in the process of wanting to keep that farm going, which means they want to move forward. They're not looking at going back to something that is, say, 1950s technology or 1940s, what I'm dealing with. They want to go forward. They want to build a new robotic dairy barn. And they are not looking at having any great issues because they're not looking at building huge. They're not looking at building something that will house 9,000 cows. They're looking at building that will house 60 cows. They'll house our herd. But for the future of dairy farming as we see it in this state. And that, I think, is what I would like to talk about this morning, in that what is our future and what has been our heritage here in Minnesota. Our heritage in Minnesota was that we came to this country looking for opportunity to be small dairy farmers and farmers out here where we could be independent business people and be able to be ourselves and be who we are as business people out here in the country. And that has been our heritage. And from there, we built our communities, we built our families, and we built forward our state. And to that end, I think is what we should look at as our future. I am not one who believes that our future is something that just unreels before us like a newsreel and it just happens to us. I think our future is something that is a product of our past and our choices and our present. And if we are to make the choices today that will give us the future we want tomorrow, then we need to be looking at what choices are we making. And one of the choices we're looking at is whether or not we will be changing how this board will be impacting us in the future. Having it as a board of last resort is good. Having it as a board that has expertise is good. And if we don't have that, then we have problems. We have problems like they have in Washington State. I brought along my Hordes dairyman, dairy farmer, and in there they have an article about the manure world is being turned upside down. Because out in Washington State, as of within the last month or so, they had a ruling by a judge out there saying that if you are spreading manure on the ground in your area, you better be really careful about how you're doing it and that you're following your plan, your manure management plan, because if you're not following it and following it to the point where the amount that you're putting on isn't being used by the crop that's coming off, you are no longer just spreading an agricultural product for a fertilizer, you are spreading a hazardous waste. And that's what happens when you get super concentrations. Because when you're talking a small farm like mine, it's not a big problem. We don't have that many cows. But if you're talking a huge dairy, that's a whole nother ballgame. For us, we have about a half-mile max to go out to the end of our farm and back again, okay? If you're talking a huge dairy, they got miles and miles of roads that they got to go out and back. They're impacting a lot of people in a lot of ways, and they're impacting infrastructure, new roads around them and their environment. Now, another point I'd like to bring up. Last week, I happened to be down in Iowa, and down there, they just, as of Tuesday, the Des Moines Water Works filed a lawsuit against the 3 county ditch districts above Des Moines. And this is an article that's put out by a law professor from Drake University outlining the situation. And what they have there is that they have, in the last 20 years, allowed, what you say, CAFOs to go run amok in this area. They have allowed huge expansion. And because of it, the amount of runoff is now impacting the water into the city of Des Moines, to the tune of, if they do not do something about the runoff coming into their city, they will have to build a water treatment plant that, to remove the nitrates, that will cost the city $100 million. In other words, if we do not do things, we do not make our choices correctly today, we will pay big prices in the future for those wrong choices. Thank you. Is anybody got any questions? I can see that people are getting restless.
Any questions for Mr. Connie? I don't see any. Thank you for coming forward and testifying. Members, I'm trying to figure out our strategy here. I've got a couple of, at least one more citizen has come forward. I actually think I'll have the citizen come forward now. Stan Suttinger, if you could come forward. I believe you identified that you want to testify. Stan Suttinger from Minneapolis. Okay, here he comes. And then I've got, I'm assuming 2 more to testify opposed to the bill. And if I gave each of you 5 minutes, I've got a representative from the Land Stewardship Project and Mr. Morris from MEP. That would get us till 10-2. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 testifiers. I'm assuming want to testify for the bill. Maybe you testifiers for the bill could visit with Ms. Zipko while we hear from the next 3 and see if you want to limit your testimony, and we could take a vote before 10, and if you don't, we'll just come back tonight. And so I'd rather do that. I want to make sure that all, and we'll consult with Representative Hansen too to see how, to this point, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have some members who have some questions, so we may, when we get to the wrap-up, and then the testimony may spur some questions, so.
Okay. Representative Hansen, would you prefer we just come back tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back tonight. Okay, so you can disregard everything I just said. Welcome to the committee. If you could identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to give testimony. My name is Stan Sattinger, and I'm a resident of South Minneapolis. And I can't claim familiarity with any of the details of the legislation or the proposed changes in the legislation. I'll tell you the reason why I'm here is an article that appeared in yesterday's Star Tribune, and I'll read a quotation. I don't know whether the gentleman is present here today that made the statement, but according to Star Trib, in a recent hearing, Representative Tony Cornish of Vernon Center told members of the the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, you wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the legislature. We gave you rulemaking authority of which many of us regret. And the reason we're here today, and we have some of these bills, is because of this arrogance. So this this statement in the press concerns me. My definition of arrogance in this connection is the belief that corporate well-being trumps human well-being in importance. I feel that I have a right to clean air, clean water, and a stable climate. The authority of the MPCA Citizens Board, as I understand it, is needed to ensure that corporate interests don't compromise those rights. I oppose House File 1394, as I understand it, which would gut the authority of the MPCA Citizens Board for environmental review. House File 1394 looks out for big business interests at the expense of the rest of us, and I feel that that is wrong. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Settinger. Not seeing any questions. Appreciate your testimony. Let's see. I think we'll just go back with the order we had and the way it was published then, as long as we're coming back tonight. Mr. Lefebvre from the milk producers, if you could come forward. Thank you. Welcome. If you could identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Bob Lefebvre. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Milk Producers Association. It's the organization that represents all dairy farmers, whether it was like the earlier testifier, organic dairy farmers, and all the way to dairy farmers like the fairs at Riverview and the Baker Dairy that was mentioned earlier. Our motto is, we respect people, and we want to do whatever we can, and we support dairy farmers that follow the law, that are environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable. So, I just want to start by briefly talking about the situation that we have for livestock producers in Minnesota versus other states. We do have the extra process, that's the environmental review process, one of the processes that we've been talking about here this morning, that livestock farmers don't have in other states. And that starts when you reach the stage of 700 cows. If you're 701 cow, you would have to go through the environmental review process and get an NPDES permit, SDS permit, etc. In addition to that, we have the local townships and their zoning, where you have opportunity for public input. You also have the county conditional use permit process, where there is also opportunity for public input. And then as well through the NPDES, SDS permitting process, there's opportunity for public input as well. I think former Commissioner Larson did an outstanding job of laying all that out with you earlier. I think it's also important to note that these operations, dairy farms, have to reach a standard of zero discharge. So in order to receive an NPDES SDS permit, they have to be built and operated in a manner of absolute zero discharge from their operation. And they must also have a manure management plan or a nutrient management plan that does not allow them to exceed crop uptake for the nutrients that are applied back onto the field. That includes both the manure as well as commercial fertilizer. That must be reported on an annual basis, where they'll take the sample of the manure that is applied to the land and they're add that to that. If they apply any commercial fertilizer, which has to be a part of their permit, that has to be approved. Combine that, and that has to be reported on an annual basis to to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I think it's also important to note that this bill that Representative Fabian has put forward does not eliminate the Citizens Board. It still keeps them in that capacity where they can ask for and have a public hearing about any particular operation. And I think it's safe to say that if it's one operation, it's too many. It's not about just one negative declaration in this case, because of the ripple effect that it has across an entire industry. We just finished having a summit, a Minnesota Dairy Growth Summit, a few weeks ago here in Minnesota, where we had the Lieutenant Governor, we had Commissioner Stein, we had those within industry, and we had dairy farmers. All are committed to wanting to grow the industry in a sustainable manner, because it's good for everybody. It's good for the state of Minnesota, environmentally and economically. It's good for dairy farmers, because they're going to increase their infrastructure around them. And this is one of those areas. In fact, Commissioner Stein made the statement that we need to find some harmony between the local, county, and state permitting processes. And we believe this is one of those ways in which we can help to provide more harmony in that whole process, in that whole permitting process. I guess in closing, I could get into some of the specifics on Baker Dairy. I will get into one, and that is the fact that the MPCA staff, their technical staff, engineers, and along with the project proposer, spent months and months and months developing putting together their EAW, which actually is a good process. And because if there's anything that perhaps may need to be changed from the original proposal, they're going to find it in that, which is good. And it helps maybe make some adjustments that'll improve it both environmentally and socially. The MPCA staff and MPCA commissioner had recommended a negative declaration for an EIS. The board, the Citizens Board, after their discussion, and even after Commissioner Stein said, how about if we table this, and then we can maybe have them do a little bit more extra work on this, and it can come back. The board decided to go against the recommendation and issue a positive declaration for an EIS. That meant the MPCA staff had to scramble and automatically entirely change their findings of fact that they had built over months and months and months. In a matter of 2 hours, totally reversed the findings of fact to support the Citizens Board's decision to overturn what the staff had worked on for months. So again, thank you for putting this bill forward, and we ask you to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just minutes ago heard from a brilliant, experienced dairy farmer who helped us understand his business. And he said, we don't have problems with permits. And his lesson to us, I think, was scale makes a difference. You're talking about two very different things. And we heard very clear and helpful testimony just minutes ago about the issue of scale makes a difference. And I don't think we're hearing that distinction.
Mr. LaFave.
Mr. Chair, Representative, you bring up a very good point. Those who are milking over 700 cows have to adhere to a zero discharge standard, and they must have a nutrient management plan, they must adhere to that, and they must report it on an annual basis. Those that are smaller do not have to follow that same standard. They do not have to be built by zero discharge standards. They don't have to report their nutrient management plan, so that is accurate. We're not asking that you necessarily change it, because we do believe those that are larger do have the resources and should be held to a higher standard. And we support that at Minnesota Milk. Our members support that at Minnesota Milk. So there are different permitting you do not need to have a state or federal permit if you're milking less than 700 cows. Then in most cases, you would just work with your county to get, to make sure that you're in compliance.
Follow up, Representative Hausman?
Well, Mr. Chair, we also heard from an affected resident of that larger scale farm. And it demonstrates to us why we should hold them to a higher standard when it changes the quality of life of an entire community.
Mr. LaFave?
Mr. Chair, Representative, we agree that I think they should be held to a higher standard. There is no hydrogen sulfide standard for our smallest dairies. So we hope that you don't start putting monitors around them as well to ensure the hydrogen sulfide levels are met there. So yeah, we do want that because we are concerned about the integrity of the dairy farmers that are across the state of Minnesota. We want to be very transparent, and we have to be, especially on those that are larger, because there is a lot of public scrutiny. So yeah, we understand that, and our farmers accept that responsibility that if you're getting larger, that there is a higher standard that you must meet, and we're not asking to lower those standards at all. Certainly not. Minnesota Milk supports the existing standards that need to be met.
Representative Hansen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. LaFave, welcome. I'm kind of thinking back to the testimony we've heard over the last few weeks and talking about zero discharge. We're kind of talking about the outputs, and it seems that this Baker Dairy decision is the key rub here that has resulted in this bill and some of the whole drama over all of this. And I want to look at the inputs from the dairy side when we're going to a large, very large system. If we're looking just at the permitting, we're looking at what comes out. But we've had testimony yesterday about water inputs and water quantity, not that far from where this would be geographically, not close, but in an area where water capacity, cows take a lot of water. So when we look at a large dairy, which my understanding, and I could be not quite accurate on this, but it's my understanding this is the equivalent of a town of like 55,000 people being created in terms of the waste that would be generated. So when you have the large dairy, you've got to be having the hay, you've got to have the inputs, you've got to have the water, making sure that the well capacity is going to be there, what the impacts are in terms of that cone of depression for that water, and looking at how many acres, because phosphorus will be the impact, that phosphorus will be the limiting factor in terms of how many acres you can apply the manure on, because you'll get to a naturally occurring level plus the use that you might not be able to put it on the same acres year after year after year. So isn't that kind of where the EIS was going, is to look at what's going in and how much you've got to look out rather than just does it make the permit?
Mr. LaFave, before you answer, are you available to come back tonight?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anticipate that. Mr. LaFave.
All right, Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen. Now, I must say I'm not a representative of Riverview Farms, the proposer of Baker Dairy. However, I guess I have reviewed the Citizens Board tape on more than one occasion, and I am somewhat familiar with it. First of all, the well where the Baker Dairy itself was going to be taking from was already permitted by DNR for more than 3 times the amount that the dairy was going to be taking. So I don't know why that would have been any issue. I mean, DNR approved it. This was going to be taking a third of what they were DNR approved. Secondly, all the other inputs, you're absolutely right, which is one of the reasons why we need to have more cows, which is one of the reasons why I think Mr. Galen Reitz at MPCA, I think in that recent article stated that, basically to summarize it, we could use more livestock here in the state of Minnesota. And as long as, and obviously we believe that way too, but we also believe that they must be following the laws, socially, environmentally, in order to economically be sustainable. So alfalfa on the landscape, Representative Hansen, you obviously know the advantages of that to reducing soil erosion and all the other benefits of a perennial crop. And the corn silage, being able to take that up earlier allows you then to perhaps in some cases even put on a cover crop if it works into the farmer's management practices. Manure adds organic matter to the soil, helps to enhance the soil profile. I could go on and on. So these operations, any farm, any dairy farm of any size is one of the most perfect life cycle production systems that we have when managed properly. And that's key. And the process that we have in place in Minnesota more than adequately assures that these processes on these farms are going to be managed in a socially and environmentally sustainable manner.
Thank you. Follow-up, no, Representative Hansen. Mr. Lefebvre, thank you for your testimony. I just want to confirm, and I'm going to ask you to come back tonight. I'm thinking of two of my neighbors, both of them I've had conversations quite a bit over the year, and I want to be sure I think you said this, but I want to be sure. I'm thinking of Kevin Chamberlain, he's on the local SWCD board and had been active for a number of years. I think my last conversation with Kevin is he's milking 60 cows. He's an organic dairy farmer that lives just within about 2 miles of my home. Is your organization represent folks like Kevin?
Mr. Chair, yes, we do have members who are organically certified. In fact, one of our board members who just retired off the board, Joe Borgerding, is an organic certified dairy farmer. And we have many others who are organic as well, yes.
Okay, and then Mr. Lefebvre, I've got another friend that unfortunately lost his brother tragically. I can think of him, was my age as a youngster, but continues to have a very successful dairy farmer, Bill Sword. He's a bigger dairy farmer for our area. I think he milks a few hundred. I'm almost positive he's under the 700, so whatever that means, he's under that. But does your organization represent someone like Mr. Sword?
Mr. Chair, yes, we do. Our members, we have members milking as few as 10 cows, and the Riverview is also a member of Minnesota Milk as well. So yes.
Okay.
And everything in between.
Thank you. I think there's additional questions for you, so you've confirmed you can come back. Members, we're going to be, Representative Dill.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think you're getting ready to recess for the moment. Thank you. Could I have a moment to clarify something that we talked about?
Representative Dill.
Thank you. Okay, so we were talking about wetlands just a day or two ago, and I gave some information about Coochin County, and I wanted to set the record straight for the members. I talked about some, and it'll take just a moment if you can get.
Go ahead, Representative Dill.
Thank you very much.
We've got 1 minute left, so I don't think you're going to take that long.
Okay, the total, the Coochin County has 1.4 million acres. I was off by 100,000. I was low 100,000. And their average mitigation rate is 3.7 acres per year. So you can do the math and find out that it would take many, many years. Just to give you an example, if Paul Revere, who was born in 1734, destroyed 50 acres per year, we still would not be at the point of getting rid of 1% of the wetlands in Coochin County. Their actual rate of wetland mitigation is 2.7 acres per year. So it would take 14,000 years or something along that line to reach 1%. So I'm just trying to give some scale and magnitude of what I talked about yesterday. I have a handout. I'll pass it out. Thank you.
Okay. And Representative Dill, we can get that to people tonight. Members, we are, Representative Cornish.
Real quickly, since my name was mentioned, Tony Cornish of Vernon Center, Minnesota, I still feel the same way about the PCA. Go ahead.
We're surprised, Representative Cornish. Members, we are in recess until 4:30, and we'll be back in the basement hearing room, and we will be voting on this bill tonight. We're in recess.